Welcome back to episode 11 of Untested Arcana, the show where I take popular characters and media and use them to make tabletop RPG content. Like the name suggests, all of this is untested. The point of this show is not to bring you fully ready to use, ready to publish subclasses. It's to make first drafts and talk about the kinds of game design, narrative design decisions that go into making those drafts, so that hopefully you can learn to make stuff like this yourself. This is our 11th episode and our 11th 5th edition subclass. I'll say right now that this is the worst one. This subclass we're going to talk about today is the least directly tied to its inspiration, and I'll talk about why. This week, me and my D&D group went to the Wednesday screening of the Dungeons & Dragons movie. We saw it in 4DX, like the seat-shaking version, which, frankly, I would recommend. It was great. But one of the trailers that showed before the movie was for Transformers Rise of the Beasts. And that trailer reminded me of an old subclass I had kind of half-designed a long time ago for a series of Godzilla-themed subclasses, and I'd made one around Mechagodzilla. And that subclass focused on constructs, metal constructs, which I feel like don't get enough attention in the games right now. You got a lot of dragon stuff, you got a lot of giant stuff, you got a lot of infernal or celestial stuff. But I can only think of two distinctly construct-themed subclasses, and that's the Battlesmith with the little robot friend, and I guess the Clockwork Sorcerer. And since those two subclasses focus on summoning constructs, let's make one about becoming a construct. I mean, ostensibly, what I'm trying to make here is a transformer. It has one form that is humanoid, and then a second form which, could be a beast, or a metallic beast, or with reflavoring, could just be a truck. I mean, we'll talk about it, but there's no reason that a rhino stat block can't just be a truck stat block. So when you think about something that transforms, right, two classes jump to mind immediately: barbarians and druids. And while I think that barbarian would be really interesting for this, and quite cool, I think it would be more fun to figure out a way to make this a druid, specifically because it almost seems to not work, because druids are not supposed to wear metal, because constructs seem so unnatural, inorganic. It kind of flies in the face of what the druid class is usually about. But I think that's an even better reason to do it. What a cool bit of flavor and possibility to introduce into the druid play space. So let's start with a description for the Circle of Steel. Druids who cast their lot with the Circle of Steel see no distinction between the work of a careful gardener and that of a blacksmith. Both use the bounty of nature to create and to transform. Unique among druids, many in this circle choose to wield or wear metallic armor, though they are usually quite particular about how it was sourced and created, and in most cases would rather forge it themselves. As their connection deepens, they may also learn to become one with the metallic elements of the earth, using them to enhance their wild shapes in new and dangerous ways. So my goal here with this bit of flavor is to just help break down and explain why I'm making a metallic druid, why I'm going to go ahead and break one of the only hard flavor rules in the whole player's handbook: druids don't wear metal armor. I really see this as being very similar to Toph's awakening as a metal bender, and understanding that metal is just an extension of rock and minerals and ore. And I think that if you wanted to play the subclass, but you really still wanted to feel like a druid and not like a sort of wisdom artificer, which, I'm risking building here, that I've given you this little olive branch to explain why you're a metal druid. Now, one of the big decisions I had to make up front with this subclass was, are we going to have circle spells? Druids do not universally have circle spells. In fact, initially, only the land druid did. That was a special land druid thing. Now, since then, it has become much more common to give subclasses of really any spellcaster subclass spells. You're seeing it in, sorcerers now, where they never were. But it's still not universal. Stars druid is very new, doesn't have circle spells. And as we're going to see later, I really want this class to focus on wild shaping, or a form of wild shaping. I don't really want them to be super spell-casty. I mean, think about a transformer. They don't do a ton of obvious magic. They're basically just warriors. But I am trying to build this on top of the druid chassis. So I kind of have to compromise a bit. And my compromise was to do something that no Druid subclass does, which is have a Ranger-style spell list, i.e. one spell at every spell level, not two. That was my way of sort of getting you the spells I want you to have, the ones that give you the interesting metallic flavor, but without actually being like, oh, here's a bunch of spells, you should be casting spells all the time. Circle spells. Your attunement to elemental metal grants you access to certain spells. You learn an additional spell when you reach certain levels in this class, as listed in the Circle of Steel spells table. Once you gain access to one of these spells, you always have it prepared, and it doesn't count against the number of spells you can prepare each day. If you gain access to a spell that doesn't appear on the Druid list, the spell is nonetheless a Druid spell for you. At 2nd level, you learn Identify, at 3rd level, Heat Metal, at 5th, Haste, at 7th, Stone Skin, and at 9th, Animate Objects. Now, if you are someone who's memorized a lot of the D&D rules, you are probably immediately going to notice that this is mostly just the Forge Cleric spell list. Identify, Heat Metal, and Animate Objects are all from the Forge list. Which, makes sense. I'm basically making a Forge Druid. But I don't mind. I mean, this is something to keep in mind when you're making homebrew. There is no rule that says you can't have something incredibly similar to something else. If you're making a Storm Warlock and you just want to use the spell list from Tempest Cleric, just do it. If a spell list is good, a spell list is good. And like we talk about a lot of times with spell lists, when you are restricting yourself to the basic rules, there just aren't that many spells to choose from. There just aren't that many metal-themed spells in the basic rules. So yeah, there's going to be some overlap with any existing metal-themed subclass. The next feature is Smelter's Skill. When you choose this circle at 2nd level, you understand the continuity between the earth beneath your feet and the metal in your hands. You gain proficiency with heavy armor and smith's tools. This is my rule-breaking one. Druid is a medium armor and shields class. It shares that with Cleric. Many Cleric subclasses get heavy armor. 0 Druid subclasses do. And I understand why. The flavor thing of not wearing heavy armor, I totally get it. But, yeah, I want it. I want it here. The smith's tools also make sense. And again, we're 2 features in, and this is just Forge Cleric. And that, again, is fine. Especially because we're about to get real weird with primal constructs. At 2nd level, your transformations are wrought like steel. You can use your wild shape to transform into a beast with a challenge rating as high as your druid level divided by 4, rounded down to the nearest challenge rating. You ignore the max challenge rating column of the beast shapes table, but must abide by the other limitations there. This use of your wild shape is unique. When you transform in this way, your new form is made entirely of metal, your creature type changes to construct, and you gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical sources. You determine how this affects the form's appearance and how closely it resembles the beast. Your choice has no additional effect on its game statistics. You can stay in this shape for a number of minutes equal to your druid level. You then revert to your normal form unless you expend another use of your wild shape feature. So there we have the Transformer feature. I am straight up, rules as written, giving you metal animal shapes. And with that little comment about how this may affect the form's appearance and how closely it resembles the beast, kind of giving you tacit permission to be like, this rhino stat block is a Camaro. But this is where I want to talk about math. And weirdly, one of my favorite parts of making homebrew and really just tabletop design, crunchy tabletop design in general, which is like making spreadsheets. I realize this may not be anyone else's favorite part, but I actually think a lot of people like this. So I went into this with the idea that I want a metal wild shape, and I want it to have bludgeoning, piercing, slashing resistance. How can I square that balance-wise against basically Moon Druid? I'm looking at Moon Druid as I don't want to be stronger than Moon Druid. I don't want to be particularly weaker if I can help it. But more importantly, I do not want this to be strictly better Moon Druid. So I can look at the numbers that Moon Druid gives me, which is challenge rating and how that goes up, right? I can plot that against level. I can look at how long you can stay in that shape, which I think matters quite a lot. And then weirdly, I can look at how Moon Druid's wild shape tracks with action economy. So there are these sort of 3 things that I work on. Moon Druid scales from CR1 to CR6 over the course of all your levels. You can stay in it for the normal amount of time, which is like several hours. And you can do it as a bonus action, which means you can transform and take a full, meaningful turn in combat. Whereas normal wild shape, using an action, is pretty bad for the action economy. You kind of just give up your whole turn transforming. So I know when I'm beginning that I want this physical damage resistance, which functionally doubles my effective HP. So I know I want to lower the challenge rating that I can transform into so that I'm not turning into just a strictly better Moon Druid shape. I did Druid level divided by 4. Now, that briefly means that for like one level, we can both turn into CR1 creatures, which I'm just going to kind of ignore because the math just works out that way. Now I have the second lever I can pull, which is, well, what if I can just be them for less time? You know, a Moon Druid can turn into a giant bear and kind of walk around with the party for a dungeon crawl and then just kind of be in wild shape when it's needed. Primal Constructs don't work that way. You're really committing. Like, I'm going to use this for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Even at high levels, like a 15-minute wild shape is still not a ton of time. And then, of course, I've got the action economy lever, which I just didn't pull. Could I have made this a bonus action? Yeah, but at that point, I'm just making another Moon Druid, and I do want this to feel distinct. And from a flavor perspective, I do feel like the Transformers, that their transformation is like a big event. And so later, we're going to deal with the effect this might have on the action economy. But for now, this is how I felt it was okay to balance this. By knowing that I'm effectively doubling HP with the resistances, so I bring down the challenge rating and I bring down how long you can spend in that shape. That's my attempt to balance so that this character and a Moon Druid maybe are on close to equal footing, or at least this character is not just totally trivializing the Moon Druid. Speaking of the bonus action thing, the next feature is Refined Forms. Starting at 6th level, your primal constructs grow in power and ferocity. Your attacks in construct form count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. Additionally, while you are transformed, you can use a bonus action to expend 1 spell slot to discharge a blast of elemental energy. Choose acid, cold, fire, lightning, or poison. You project energy of the chosen type in a 15-foot cone. Each creature in that area must make a dexterity saving throw against your spell save DC, taking 1d10 damage of the chosen type per spell slot level on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Boy, I feel like I've recorded this exact thing 1,000 times. 6th level magical damage. That's everywhere in D&D. The second part is another interesting lever to pull. So Moon Druids get a bonus action spell slot healing ability, which has 2 benefits. One, it gives them more HP so they can stay in wild shape longer. And 2, it gives them stuff to do with their spell slots, because Moon Druid is not intended to be a high magic subclass. You are committed to just fighting. You are a combat character who punches and kicks and claws and bites because all your features are about turning into animals. Well, I want to do the same thing, but since I've already given you a hit point boost with the resistances, instead I'm now going to give you originally this was Mechagodzilla's lightning breath. Now it's just kind of an all-purpose Transformers weapon blast of some sort. I took most of the text from the spell Dragon's Breath, because that's basically what it is. And so now, at 6th level, you have something to spend all your spell slots on, because you're probably not using them in combat, because in combat, you're turning into a Camaro. Next, at 10th level, we get Forger of Life. At 10th level, your hands can return the Spark of Life to worked metals. You always have the Awaken spell prepared, and it doesn't count against the number of spells you can prepare each day. When you cast Awaken, you can choose to target an object of small or medium size that is composed primarily of metal. Once awakened, the object gains the game statistics of an animated armor, but is otherwise subjected to the same effects as any other creature awakened by this spell. This was an interesting one. This was the last one I thought of. When you look at the Druid subclasses, even like Moon Druid, which is almost entirely focused on your combat shapes, there's always a feature that's like just some other weird, flavorful nonsense. And at first I was thinking about like enhancing animate objects somehow, like giving you more of them or something like that. Or looking for another spell like Alter Self that I could have you do at will. I considered Stone Skin for a while. But then I remembered that like weird scene in one of the Transformers movies where like the Allspark is bringing like soda machines and random objects to life. And I kind of realized like Awaken is a like Allspark Transformers spell. It's just that instead of making constructs, it makes living plants and awakened beasts. But why can't it make constructs? There is a great stat block in the basic rules for animated armor that works really well for just a generic low-level construct, and I think you should be able to make those. And if, again, you're someone who's memorized a lot of D&D rules, there's a funny little rules interaction here. So animated armors are immune to the charm condition, and Awaken charms the target of the spell for 30 days, and it is your ally for 30 days. It then, when the charm is broken, either after 30 days or after you hurt it, it decides if it wants to be your friend based on its own intelligent decisions. If animated armors can't be charmed, that means the moment they're awakened, they are making their own decisions. They are not charmed by you. I think this could be, with a cooperative DM, a fun opportunity to give some personality to an inanimate object around you. I mean, like, think about when you have, like, Speak with Animals. That's always a great opportunity as a DM to be like, what is this squirrel like? How does this squirrel feel about you and the rest of the world? Now you can ask that question of, like, I don't know, a large metal chair. The last feature, of course, at 14th, is Towering Construct. Starting at 14th level, you can scrape the sky itself. When you use your Primal Construct feature, you can expend 2 uses of Wild Shape at the same time to grow to colossal heights. You gain the following benefits for the duration of your transformation. If your form is smaller than huge, you become huge. If there isn't enough room to grow to this size, you attain the maximum possible size in the space available. You have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. Your melee attacks that deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage deal additional damage equal to half your druid level, rounded down. You have 1 use of this feature, which you regain when you complete a long rest. This, I feel, should be obvious. Honestly, I'm trying to make Mechagodzilla, but I'm trying to really make sure you can fulfill the fantasy of giant robot fights. Not large-size robot fights, not, like a big minotaur. I want you to be 25 feet tall. I want you to have a huge reach. And so I basically just grabbed like the features of the Enlarge Reduce spell. I bumped up the damage bonus, and I made it so it only worked on bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage attacks. I know there are some wild shapes that do get like poison damage, and I don't want you to increase that because that's not right. I want it to be for slams and bites and claws. And then, of course, instead of just being go up 1 size, it's become huge. Specifically because when you watch like the old Beast Wars, there was like a scorpion transformer, but he wasn't just like a big scorpion. He was the size of the cheetah one. Everyone was just kind of the same size. So if you choose a stat block for like a small creature, I want you to be a giant version of that small creature, not just like a medium-sized dragonfly. That's lame. The last thing with this is I made it so it's once per long rest because, eventually druids get unlimited wild shapes, which for Moon Druid means you can just permanently be an elemental, which I think is fine, but not a big deal. But I do think that if you could be a huge creature permanently like this, I don't like that. That was kind of a last-minute addition. I suppose 20th level druids are just ridiculous anyway, so maybe I'm worrying over nothing. But that's the whole subclass. There's not much to it. It's pretty much like Moon Druid, just a bunch of features that buff a single new type of transformation. And so now, maybe I should explain why I think this is the worst one I've made. This isn't a particularly good, like, Optimus Prime. I mean, it's just not a particularly good transformer. Transformers are probably barbarians, or fighters, or maybe rogues, or maybe monks, but they're not magic users. They're not 9th level spellcasters. So why make a druid subclass for this? Besides the fact that I think it's an interesting narrative challenge to make a metallic druid. And I think it's because, it's okay to make something that could be played vastly differently than the way you were imagining it. Certainly, if someone was really committed to the idea of being Optimus Prime, right? they would play as a Warforged, and they would reflavor their primal constructs to be a truck or whatever he's transforming into. And they would use pretty much all their spell slots to do the elemental, like that's probably lightning blasts as like his sort of various guns, maybe fire. And then maybe occasionally use some spells out of combat to, do truck stuff or maybe heal himself a little. You could play this strictly as a warrior if you wanted to. But you could also play this super differently. You could play this as like a real intense magic user who just occasionally shifts into a metallic form in an emergency. And you could take advantage of the Smith's tools I've given you and of the, minimal spell list to be basically a Forge Cleric. But I think it's a good subclass. I think this could be fun. I think this could be fun to test. Speaking of which, the things I'd be worried about here are the obvious. I'd want to play this side by side with a Moon Druid, fight the same fights, do the same things. Have I pulled these levers correctly and made something balanced, or is this a strictly better Moon Druid? I think that's totally possible. But beyond that, I don't need to test the 6th level magical attacks. I don't think I need to test the Dragon's Breath spell slot thing. That's fine. I don't need to test the Awaken thing. Who's using Awaken a ton of times? Like, who has that kind of downtime in their campaign? And frankly, I don't think I need to test the double wild shape giant thing. That's just more, does this wild shape feature make sense? So weirdly, for the subclass that I'm saying is kind of the worst as a game design exercise or a narrative design exercise, might be the easiest to test just strictly mechanically. As always, this is available right now on D&D Beyond. You can go try it out, have some fun, make a character, make Optimus Prime, or make your own thing. Your own thing that has nothing to do with Transformers, nothing to do with Mechagodzilla. If you like it, if you got any comments, questions, leave them below. Next week is going to be kind of a tough week for me. I got to do my taxes, going to Passover, and then I got Easter after that. So there's a decent chance that we're taking a week off next week, but maybe not. So until then, like, comment, subscribe, if that's your thing. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.